The Bears are in the middle of this coaching search that seems to be never ending. There is radio silence coming out of Halas Hall right now. There are a million different questions, and we are going to try to give you a million different answers. Maybe not a million. What's up, guys? Welcome into the Halas Beat YouTube show brought to you by the Bear Report. I'm Usayd Koshul. He's Nick Whalen. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, @_ Nick Whalen. What is going on, man? This is the inaugural episode. I know we've been texting back and forth about this, but here we go, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time to be a Bears fan. You know, you come off of, you beat Green Bay. You just watched two division teams look bad in the playoffs. So it's like the mighty NFC North might not be as mighty, and now you get to have the guy in place to build up, Caleb Williams, the rest of the team to hopefully take over the North.
And taking over the North is this crazy question that there's a million different ways to answer it. Because if we kind of look at philosophically, you've got teams like the Lions and Vikings, Packers too, that are notorious for, we're going to stick to drafting and developing. The Bears are a team where it's like, you're on your fifth head coach, I think, and over 14 years at this point. Matt Eberflus been about 2 months since he's been gone. And the candidate list, dude, keeps getting longer and longer and longer every day. And I tweeted this the other day. I said, well, the Bears are telling us that if this thing goes into February and past Groundhog Day, then that's completely fine with us.
Right. Yeah. And I have a theory on this. I'm curious because we haven't talked about this ahead of time, but I think it's fine. They're interviewing a bunch of candidates. Like last time, they hired Poles, and very shortly later, they hired Eberflus, and people were like, well, he didn't interview enough guys. Well, this time you have to wait. Like I know Ben Johnson is like the crown jewel for most people I see on Twitter. So he can't get hired or an in-person interview until after either the Lions lose or after the NFC Championship game, the week between the Super Bowl and NFC Championship game that they have off. So if we have multiple weeks here, why not interview a bunch of people? And my contention on this is they're interviewing a bunch of people to gather data. Hey, what do defensive guys in the division think of the Bears? What did they think of Caleb? What do they think of the scheme? What do these college guys think? What do these former head coaches think? What do these quarterback developer gurus, how would they work on things? Like if you get all this different data, it's going to help your program. Like more data is better than less data. So I don't know why there's always this pushback that I see on Twitter.
See, the pushback is interesting because at least to me, from what I've seen, there seems to be zero pushback about Ben Johnson. The pushback is really on a lot of these more sort of controversial candidates, which guys like Aaron Glenn, Drew Petzing, Pete Carroll, obviously, the Mike Kafkas and Brian Floreses of the world, the Anthony Weavers, you start to kind of look at, and I'm like, guys that have been successful in certain stops. Couple of the guys on there that obviously could use a little bit more seasoning. Petzing being one of the guys. Couple of guys that are obviously big no-nos, but I'm like, you are interviewing all these guys. There's probably only 3 to 4 legitimate candidates that are going to be standing at the podium in a few weeks answering questions.
Yep. No, 100%. And part of it, I think, is you're gathering the data. Like, think of like Adam Stenavich, right? People are like, okay, why would you interview him? Well, one, you get insight into how Green Bay, how do they develop these offensive linemen? Because they always develop them. And that's an issue that Chicago doesn't do. How they view Chicago. How would he beat Green Bay? Like all that's good data. And the other thing is when we had this whole candidate search for the offensive coordinator, right? We ended up hiring 2 guys, right? We got Shane Waldron, but then we got Thomas Brown as part of that to come along with it. Now, whether, whoever's the head coach gets one of these people as a coordinator this year to be determined, but in future years, you're already going to develop a rapport and a relationship with Anthony Weaver, Adam Stenavich, like the guys that you mentioned, where it's like, hey, maybe they're going to come along because they know Kevin Warren now. They know Ryan Poles, and like they had a good vibe in Chicago. So like, I think there's a multiple layers to it. I just don't see a negative because it costs a plane ticket, a hotel stay, a transportation, and some food.
I mean, we know that the Bears certainly don't slack when it comes to taking care of these candidates that are sort of coming in. But I will say this too, knowing the Lake Forest area, I'm not really sure where you would take some of these candidates for a fancy steak dinner if you were going to go ahead and do that. But ultimately, I mean, people some way somehow found that I think it was Ben Johnson and I believe it was Drew Petzing were both at like Boston College or something at the same time or right around the same time, similar to the whole like Ryan Poles, Brian Flores dynamic.
Mhm.
I sort of look at this whole data driven thing that you're mentioning, dude, and I'm like, listen, as much as I want this team to just hire and announce the next head coach, the rules also sort of really prohibit the Bears from getting too far ahead on their homework because it's like, yeah, you've got virtual interviews all throughout Wild Card Week. After the divisional game, so the week of January 20th, which is next week, you're going to have sort of that like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday window to be able to even talk to Ben Johnson. I mean, I think there's a legitimate sort of argument to be made here that as much as this is about like collecting the data, the other half of it is also maybe the Bears know that they came away real impressed with Ben Johnson, and all these candidates are just there to sort of fill the schedule per se because they know that they have a legit shot at landing Ben Johnson.
Right. And the other part is like Chicago's not the only one that's done this. Now, this is, I think, the most list that has ever been done that I know of. But last year, the Chargers interviewed 15 and they still got Harbaugh. Like, so other teams gather more data or bring in more candidates. It's interesting that you worded it that way in terms of the rules, because there are rules, right? Like that's an important part of this thing. Because you have the Rooney Rule, you can't talk to them in person or or at all if they have playoff game coming up. I think part of this too is I'm going to be worried if they're bringing in 22, 23, 24, like those other candidates after you could hire, whether it's Ben Johnson, Todd Monken, whomever your like top 3 or 4 prime guys are, if it's the time that you can hire them and you're wasting time with these other guys, that's when I'd be worried. But right now, I'm not worried at all.
And there's still a chance the Bears wholeheartedly decide, hey, we are going to request an interview with someone completely random, even this late in the process. Because let's be honest, yes, there are certain fans on Twitter that were like, oh, Marcus Freeman, way before this head coaching search even started. And the Bears kind of kicked it into full gear. But there was also sort of this kind of out of the blue thing of, hey, we're going to go after guys like Anthony Weaver. We're going to bring in guys like Marcus Freeman, which would honestly be a lot more complicated of a dynamic with the whole buyout and his clause and everything.
Right.
But what I find to be so interesting is if I were to start looking at this list right here, to me, the Mike McCarthy fiasco is one to sort of monitor here. Because if you're the Bears, you know that Mike McCarthy had your number for whatever, 13, 14 seasons while he was in Green Bay. You know that he was consistently competitive. My big issue here, though, is the fact that he was never really successful or overly successful in Dallas. But it's not like the Bears have been this team that's been wildly successful. I mean, I'm sure that if you were to put, Mike McCarthy's records in front of a Bears fan right now, without saying the name Mike McCarthy, and you were to say, well, this is a coach that went to the divisional round a couple times, went to the wild card, kind of mutually parted ways with his organization because they couldn't agree on a contract, even though there were a ton of injuries to guys like Dak Prescott and Micah Parsons this year, most Bears fans would probably sign off on Mike McCarthy if the win-loss record was in front of him.
Right. And it's the name. There's this, that he's the Packer guy is part of it. But, as you mentioned, there were a lot of things that went wrong this year and he still did, I think 7 wins is what Dallas had. Y'all, they had more wins than Kyle Shanahan did. That's the one thing that drives me. If you take the names aside here, like Kyle Shanahan gets boosted on this pedestal of like this guru, he's never won a Super Bowl. Mike McCarthy has a better win-loss record in the regular season than him. I mean, even after this, you take out 2024, he had 12 wins 3 straight years in Dallas. Dallas hasn't had 12 wins. I think I had it since 2006. They had 13 wins. So they had this gap in there where it wasn't successful. That's why they brought in McCarthy, and he was successful, y'all. So like, I know there's this connotation of he has this like floor. He has 11 playoff appearances, I believe. Chicago has, I think it's 4 playoff appearances since Mike Ditka. Like we need to talk about some realistic expectations of it's like, well, we want to have Super Bowl or bust. Yo, we just need to start treading water. And then we can start worrying about something else. I'm not saying that Mike McCarthy is treading water, but he has been proven to be successful in 2 different organizations with 2 different quarterbacks, 2 different systems, 2 different, the public owner versus Jerry Jones. I haven't heard of any like scandals or players getting in trouble or issues in the locker room. Like things have gone on pretty well. The only negative I can remember is Aaron Rodgers, which now looking at LaFleur and Rodgers with the Jets, it's probably Aaron Rodgers.
I mean, you sort of, I think, start to wonder, right? Like what really went wrong for some of these teams. And like, I am not even gonna lie to you, dude. I wholeheartedly agree because it's like, I sort of look at this team right now. I look at where this franchise is at in terms of, I guess, their sort of like, quote unquote ability to get this thing right. And I had a tweet the other day. I am trying to figure out how to upload it onto StreamYard here. But anyways, the basic gist of the tweet, and I'll link it into the video here, is the fact that it's like the Bears haven't been to the playoffs in forever, haven't consistently been there in years. So a guy who can keep the team competitive each year while making the playoffs is plenty appealing to ownership. I know some people are going to be like, yo, that's the issue. But I'm here to tell you, quite frankly, it goes back to what I said a moment ago. If you were to take his win-loss record and his list of accomplishments in Dallas without explicitly saying, like, this was the Dallas Cowboys or this was Mike McCarthy, most fans would probably end up signing off on it. Now, if it's not Mike McCarthy, to me, you have to kind of also give some serious consideration to Todd Monken, who I get is almost 60 years old, late 50s kind of guy here, but he some way somehow has really found a way to take Lamar Jackson's game to another level. And it's not just the box score scouting you see, it's just wholeheartedly the way that, as an offensive coordinator and as a play caller, and you and I both know this, you're trying to basically figure out ways to make sure that whatever it is you're running in the run game meshes with whatever it is you're doing in the pass game. There is, to me, no better example in the league of the marriage between the run and the pass than what Todd Monken's done with the Ravens over the last couple seasons.
100%. I have to digress real quick because I messed up. Because I heard this stat from, I think it was Albert Breer today when I was working out. There's been 4 playoff wins since Ditka, okay? And I think it's 6 appearances. But that's 30 years. 30 years, 6 appearances, 4 wins. It's not good enough. But I'm with you. Tom Monken is in my top 4, which I want to ask you that after this. But you have to blend your offense to your best players. And the thing I think that people forget about is Lamar's had, I think he should win the MVP this year. We'll see what happens, but he's won 2. So won 1 last year. Prior to that, he had his great breakout year. Then he had this just kind of mediocre offensive in Baltimore. Like he wasn't playing his best. They talk about him in the playoffs and all this kind of stuff. And he's gotten the best out of Lamar. He's played the best he has these last 2 years, and now he catered it to Derrick Henry. Before it was Mark Andrews and 2 tight end sets almost all the time. Like he's catered it. And then you go back prior to that, he did well with Georgia, right? College. So younger guys, different weapons there. Prior to that, he did well in Tampa Bay as the OC. So having someone that can cater his offense to his personnel and he's successful in multiple spots, that's the data you want to see for a head coach.
Yeah, that's some really good stuff there. I will also say this, what is so interesting about Monken is that if he does in fact get the Bears gig, he's kind of, I feel like, your classic Ryan Poles. It's going to be like a classic Ryan Poles Bears move because you've got guys like Edwards and Sanborn that grew up in the Chicagoland area. Monken is a native of Wheaton, Illinois, so he's about 45 minutes from Chicago, about an hour from Halas Hall, not too far at all. And, being someone that coaches high school football here in Illinois, I have to certainly say, right, like the Monkens just seem to be everywhere in the world of football. I know that Todd's brother is an assistant at one of the local high schools, kind of heard that through the coaching ranks. Don't have any information as to whether or not he's actually going to get the gig or when he's going to go ahead and interview. He's another one that obviously hasn't even had the chance to interview yet because he's been so busy in these playoff games. So the Bears are sort of the search is sort of far from over. Yeah. But talking the concept of, I think, quarterback development here, I mean, there's like 20-something guys on this list. How many can we actually say are legit quarterback developers?
Right. Well, real quick, man, I want to see if you agree with this part. Todd Monken, if he gets hired, he gives me the vibe of like Bruce Arians, right? Like this, like quarterback offensive guru, because Arians y'all was like with Andrew Luck and Pittsburgh and all these places, and then goes to Arizona as they're like, well, he's an older hire, and then just crushes it. That's what the vibe he gives me.
I mean, hey, I could certainly see it, and what I find to be so interesting about Monken is, again, you're talking about a guy that, went to college in Illinois, was a 3-year starter at quarterback as well, but he's been in a lot of different spots. Like, go back to his time in college being a GA, then was a DB's receivers coach, coach receivers and running backs at Louisiana Tech, sort of made the jump to the NFL with the Jaguars, then kind of, was a head coach for a couple of years.
Yeah, but is it Southern Miss? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe it was Southern Miss where he was the head coach. And then obviously has been in the NFL since 2016, and kind of has really found a role just being overly successful, to be honest.
Right. And it's the thing that's appealing is like when you have, well, except for those 2 years in Georgia. So like when you have a top offense in multiple leagues with multiple different spots, it's like this guy might have the good juice. But anyways, going back to your question, like in terms of true quarterback developers, right? So obviously Ben Johnson's on the list. I wish Ben Johnson had more data points than just here, but resurrecting Jared Goff, who was a cast-off, y'all, as it was a throw-in in that trade, means something to me. I mean, Mike Kafka, Drew Pensink, I'm not high on them. Arthur Smith, I mean, creative, not high. I am not a Joe Brady guy, man. And I know I get in these arguments on Twitter often, but Joe Brady wasn't the OC at LSU. Yes, he helped call some plays, but that was like the best collection of talent, man, we might have ever seen in college. When you have, because now you look at it, Burrow, Chase, and Jefferson, and then you still had Edwards-Helaire, Terrace Marshall, Randy Moss's son at tight end, and you had a squad. And he's only there 1 year. It's not like he recruited him all there. It's not like he developed Joe Burrow into who he is. He was there 1 year, and then was okay at Carolina. I would say bad. I mean, he got fired, but maybe okay at best. Goes to Buffalo, and Buffalo's kind of the same they've always been, for 5 years. I mean, Josh Allen is a top 3 quarterback. They've had a top 5 offense for 5 straight years. It's different. He runs it a little bit more, but to me, it's tough to say, hey, give this guy a head job based off of he's been in 2 really good situations, and I can't tell you he's a difference maker either way.
Okay, so I have sort of been a big fan of Joe Brady.
Ooh, this is fun.
Well, okay, so see, I'm a fan of Joe Brady because I feel like with him, you kind of look at the work that he did at LSU, and let's be honest, it was solid. But there's a fair argument to be made that LSU offense over the last, I want to say, 10 seasons in college football was probably one of the most loaded offenses that we've seen in the 21st century.
Yep.
Definitely going back the last 10 years. Like, I think there's a fair argument to be made that if that LSU offense was in this 12-team playoff with Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they are everyone's sort of consensus natty pick, okay?
Yes.
But the other part of this that I find to be so interesting, you're talking about how, well, Brady was fired in Carolina. I mean, that was the Matt Rule fiasco that I don't think any coach goes there and is successful at all with just how.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Was.
So to me, like if we toss out Carolina, but if he's a guru, you think he would be better than the others. But like that's why I'm like, okay, I mean, Carolina is Carolina, but Buffalo's Buffalo too. Like there's not a big difference. I looked at like third down percentages and scoring and yards. Like he's on par or maybe a little bit under. I mean, Ken Dorsey got fired last year. He's averaged, I think, like 10 more yards per game and maybe 1 more point per game than Ken Dorsey did.
Yeah, you have to wonder how much of a significant upgrade he's really been from Ken Dorsey. But let me ask you this, because last year at this time in the winter, when I'm saying toward the end of the 2023 season, there were a lot of people talking about, well, what are the Bears going to do if you fire Matt Eberflus then? And obviously we know they didn't. If you had to pick between, seriously, Bobby Slowick or Joe Brady, your and Ryan Poles share, who are you going with between the two?
Right now?
Yeah.
For
right
last
now.
year or this year?
Like last year leading into this season.
Oh.
Bobby Slowick or Joe Brady. Like, I'm curious to know because I don't know wholeheartedly. As much as I sort of praise Joe Brady, I understand his downsides. The same with Bobby Slowick. So it'd be like it'd be like red pill, blue pill type mentality.
It would be because Bobby Slowick's concepts are a little bit deeper. I mean, think of like Mike Martial. So you would need the offensive line, which Chicago doesn't have. And then Joe Brady's would be a lot more run oriented, which do we have the O-line for that or the running back? So yeah, it would be, you're right, like a blue pill, red pill. I think I would have to go with Slowick because I think he would have the most hype last year this time.
Yeah, the Slowick offense, to your point, is the Mike Martz offenses are interesting because I know that Mike Martz is not the most popular guy when it comes to Bears world. And like, listen, guys, I understand that completely, but I also don't think people realize that when Mike was in St. Louis all those years before this, I guess, concept of like the offensive guru kind of came into play, like Mike Martz was that guy. And it's interesting because I've got a whole bunch of playbooks saved up here. I was able to get my hands on Mike Martz's 2001 playbook. And anyways, I'll send this to you if you want me to. I got a whole folder of some of this stuff, right? But this thing, is about 500 pages. But it's like you kind of look at it and you're seeing some sort of like elements of just a true gap scheme being run. And then what you're seeing is a lot of like concepts today that NFL teams are using, like the duo run, which is pretty much just get at least 2 to 3 double teams and then just pave the way for your running back. Yep.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, dude, he took Kurt Warner, right, and made him into the best player in the league. He took Mark Bulger, a 6th-round pick, and made him a Pro Bowler. Like Mike Martz had some great things. He had some downfalls. He loved to throw, right? He liked the inbreakers. He had speedy guys. It was a thing, but it's definitely a positive. I'm curious, man. So of this list, who are your like 3 to 4 favorites for the Bears head coach?
Okay, this is tough because like I know Mike Vrabel's on the list. We can kind of eliminate him. Mm-hmm. Ben Johnson's obviously going to be number 1 for me. Kind of split on David Shaw, so I would have to cross him off the list too. But there's 2 guys, right, that are literally 1A, 1B for me. It's Ben Johnson and Todd Monken. Then you start to look at it. I have to say, Marcus Freeman, even though I know he's not coming here, would be a number 3 for me. And then, honestly, the 4th guy would probably end up being like Mike McCarthy or Pete Carroll if you went the retread route.
I got you.
And I will fully say this. Like, I had someone reply to one of my tweets and be like, well, guys like Bill Walsh were retread coaches. But the reality is that it's like Raheem Morris is also a second-time head coach this year, but it took him like more than a decade to get back in the chair. Mike Vrabel is the lone exception because of how the Patriots operate, but you just don't see a lot of these, second-time head coaches get fired like 1 year or be out of the game for a year and then come back, the very next year.
Yeah. It's weird because you have like Doug Peterson, right? Like epically fail, but then you have Andy Reid that like epically did well, so like it's kind of all over the place. So my top 3 or 4 similar. So like Ben Johnson's up there, Todd Monken's up there for me, Mike McCarthy's up there for me, and probably my 4th would be Aaron Glenn. I'm not a Cliff Kingsbury guy. I don't want to get into that one either. Marcus Freeman would be fun too. I would not put him up there. I just don't think he realistically would come, or I don't even know if they are going to interview him. I think they just want to. But the rest of the guys on the list, like I think there's reasons to interview them to get data or some insight. But like Pete Carroll just doesn't do it for me at this point. I respect him a ton. I get it, but I'm just not there. If I had to retread, I would go Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, it seems like it's I feel like red pill, blue pill again with Mike McCarthy versus Pete Carroll. So definitely go ahead and say if you had to pick one of the two, I personally would probably say Pete Carroll just because of the work that he did with turning Russell Wilson into a franchise quarterback after having been a 3rd-round pick. But I also believe that when you look at those early Pete Carroll Seattle teams, the 2 that were in the Super Bowl, more than anything, like you had all pros at every level on defense. You had a really good running back. And so that to me is kind of what allowed Russell to kind of have the time to develop. Unfortunately, though, he's going to be bringing in a similar philosophy here to Chicago. As much as he may have a plan and has the experience, I'm also going to say this, like the Bears don't have a ton of time anyway. Like you're already, a year through Caleb Williams' rookie contract. I know that the 2025 offseason is just beginning, but hey, in another year and a half, by the time May 2026 rolls around, that's when you're going to have to start making decisions on whether or not you feel like Caleb's the guy moving forward.
Yeah. No, that's completely true. The other thing to think about with this list is and I really need people to hear this, is there's a massive difference between being a coordinator and being a head coach. And we see it time and again where there's coordinators that are super successful, and that's why they get all these head coaching jobs. And then they fail as head coaches. And then people go to hire them as coordinators. Be like, oh, I don't know, he failed, he's bad, or whatever people say on Twitter or wherever. But like they're 2 different things, because as a coordinator, you have one unit, only so many coaches underneath you, only so many players that you're dealing with. As a head coach, you're dealing with everything in the organization. And really, you're an organizer of coaches that are organizers of players. Like there's so much more on your plate where you see, the Matt Nagy's, the Brian Dabolls. Like you go through the list, y'all. Almost every team is excited about their head coaching hire, right? And they generally hire guys that were good coordinators at one point, and most of them fail. And a lot of it is due to quarterback play, but some of it is they just can't handle all of the stuff. Think of Thomas Brown, y'all. Thomas Brown, when he got the play calling duties, which he's done this before, and he was in the box, crushing it. Flus gets fired. All of a sudden, Brown's on the field. He's dealing with everything and calling plays, and it wasn't as good. And I am 100% believing that these extra duties took away from his preparation and his focus to call better plays for the offense.
Okay, so we got about a minute and a half on this thing, minute and 15 seconds. You brought up Brian Daboll. This is something that just randomly popped into my head because Brian Daboll was one of the most hyped candidates in some of these recent cycles, and I know fans were clamoring for Brian Daboll back in 2022. Should Bears fans have this sort of like Brian Daboll sort of like concern about Ben Johnson possibly crashing and burning in the head coach chair? Like, I think it's a fair question to ask because everyone thought that, Brian Daboll, the next big thing, he's finally going to get Daniel Jones and the Giants back on track, and it's just it's not been good at all through 3 years.
Yeah, to me, I wouldn't, because Brian Daboll was really only successful as a coordinator with the Bills. Before that, he actually, I would say, failed at 3 different spots. Now, again, he didn't have great quarterback play, but like that makes you wonder: is it him or is it Josh Allen and whoever? Like when you go through these other places, like I said, you want multiple positive data points, and Ben Johnson at least has multiple seasons of being an elite coordinator.
Yeah, the elite coordinator tag, I think, makes such a big difference. Anyways, we are going to get out of this thing. We've both got, I think, quarterback clients to hop onto here. We're both coaches at heart. So if you hear certain play calls, such as, or you hear us discussing something like, I don't know, twins right ace right 192 F corner or something. All right. Sorry, I was sitting too far away from my computer to get that play call in. The season's not here yet, but I will get back into the groove of being an OC pretty soon. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, at _Nick Whalen. We're going to get a Twitter account for this thing going. We'll be recording, once or twice a week for about a minimum of 30 minutes, posting this thing on YouTube. And feel free to tweet at us on, Twitter. We're always happy to have some sort of civil discourse for football. Am I right, dude?
All right, man. Yeah, no, thanks y'all. And give a like, subscribe, and let's get this channel going.